All
Welcome.
right.
This is assignment, alignment, and creation. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Nick, just want to make sure you can see my screen.
Yeah, you got it.
Cool, cool. All right, so today, just make sure you have your notes ready so you can take some notes. If you have activities that you already use and you want to take notes on that, fantastic. If you want your class syllabus, there will be a blend of information that you might want to think about for the grading portion, which we will be going more in depth on November 8th, next month's workshop. So it could kind of work really well hand in hand. We will also be bleeding over some of this workshop into next workshop by doing some homework, quote unquote. You'll be ending with creating your own assignment and bringing that back for us to kind of chat through that.
Okay.
So with that being said, I want to touch on the goals today. We hope that you feel more confident in knowing where to access existing activities and how to connect your class curriculum. Adding existing activities to connect Statecraft to your class, and then creating your own activities to connect Statecraft to your class. So kind of those three different stages. Just want you to feel confident in that walking away. We'll go through a couple different scenarios here, one with the international relations and then the US government. We're not going to get to the share out today, but that will come up next time in the bottom part. But essentially what to do before the sim, the very beginning of the sim, turn 0 through turn 1, and then turn 2, 3 / throughout the rest. And then how do you wrap it up? So those are kind of the chunks that we'll be digging into. And as we go through it, if questions come up, feel free to speak up. And also, if there are things that you're like, well, what about this? What about this? Can we do this? The more buy-in that you have to this, the more helpful it'll be for others. So any questions before we get started?
I think we're good.
And I will pass it off to Scott. We'll finish with like a little bit of a question answer thing at the end, and then send you on your way. So Scott, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. Can you do me a favor, and if you can make me like co-host, I'll put it up on my screen so I can pull up the different things that I want to do.
You should be good to share.
I'm fortunate enough to know Hunter, so I guess I'll do a quick introduction for Nick here. I'm a civics teacher, University Liggett School, Grosse Pointe Woods, Michigan. Is my third year teaching this specific civics class, and this will be the third time that I've used a simulation. So I've used it over 4 different semesters. This will be the 5th and 6th. So in terms of how, and it was actually pretty cool because I've not gotten a chance to see the IR simulation in action before. So certainly a slightly different way to use in the class, but there's a lot of things I noticed that Stefan mentioned that translate well over here in terms like memos and things like that will certainly pop up. So one thing that I wanted to do in terms of using the simulation was show you the U.S. government simulation manual, registration, what to do in the lead up to that, and then also student position examples and goals. So I'm going to pop out here and go into the simulation. If you have the Statecraft dashboard here for the U.S. Gov simulation, and you look under documents, one thing that I would point out again in the instruction manual is really an overview of the simulation, gives you setup, really kind of walks you through everything that you need. And so this document right here can be exceptionally valuable, especially at the beginning of the process. Not something that I really look at too much now, but just in terms of getting going. And again, something I've mentioned in previous webinars to this point, that there's a sample syllabus there that you can certainly use to show how you are going to use a simulation in your class. And then I did want to point out the student position examples and goals. This is something that I have not consistently used, but I think I'm going to start with that actually this year is kind of putting this presentation in front of the students. So to Nick's question about how do you prepare the students? This is something I was thinking about as someone who liked the trial by fire in the previous years. I am starting to rethink like, well, maybe there's a little bit more pre-work that we could do. And so this might be a balance. And so it walks you through the different roles and responsibilities. This is something that I've pointed to in the past when students have had questions, but I haven't exactly put in front of them. And I think it would be something that is probably valuable and can enhance the beginning part if that's what you want to do. So I did want to show the document and how detailed it is in terms of helping you kind of get started in the process. The other point on here about registration before a specific date, the registration process, which I covered kind of in period 0 last webinar, really, if you can do it 1 week in advance, it gives you an opportunity for students who are absent, especially this fall. I've noticed that 1 or 2 kids each class period, so it gives you time to get them into the system and set up, and then you're ready to go when period 0 is starting. So period 0, you could in theory do it all within a couple days, but I think a 1 week out just kind of gives you a little bit of a cushion to make sure you're well prepared and ready to go. And you can talk to Statecraft, obviously, if there's an issue or you need something figured out. So again, I mentioned last webinar in particular focused on period 0. So I would like to point you back that if you haven't had a chance to watch any of the previous workshops that we've done to this point, period 0 is talked about pretty heavily in both of the workshops we did in August and September. So take a look back at that. There's a few resources, there's a few activities mentioned that we really go into detail about. So I want to focus on period 1 through 4 in terms of like, what does it actually look like in class? Like, what do you do? What are the assignments? What are the things that you focus on? And so first thing that we do is we review the period brief. And so I take time to answer student questions. And so just to kind of give you an example of what that looks like, I will actually take the period brief that's sent to the students' messaging center, and I'll go through each of them for President, Congress. You can see here military and intelligence, the ACLU and the media, and I'll highlight words, and you'll notice that there's some commonality across all of the period briefs of some terms that are mentioned. Not everyone, obviously, you can tell Congress gets pretty detailed briefing in this period. That's not the case for everybody. And so making sure that the students read through it and give them a physical copy and not just have it in their messaging center where, oh yeah, I can access it, but I'll look at it if I need to. And then I always kind of ask, hey, like, did you understand these terms? Who wants to talk about specific terms? And generally there's one good person in the class who will admit like, oh yeah, I didn't know what that meant. And then next thing you know, we're talking about a few other things that might be pretty valuable to the discussion. And so I actually like to highlight specific terms I want to make sure that they are aware of and ready to go with as they enter that period, that specific period. Provide supplementary resources. A lot of times what will happen is we'll have students who breeze through the period brief, and other students take a little bit more time. So I'll often have on my my class Google site, probably 4 supplementary resources per period, just to get students to notice that these are often real world issues that they're dealing with. And to give those students who kind of pick up on things quickly a little bit more context. So I look for real world examples as much as possible. This is one that I use in one of the periods that talks about how the ACLU sued over drone strikes that ended up killing a US citizen abroad. And to let the students know that, hey, you're not just dealing with a hypothetical, you are really actually addressing something that our government deals with on a day-to-day basis. So news articles, government documents, court cases, sometimes reference pages, things like that, to kind of help them have a better understanding of what's going on, or to recall the things we talked about earlier in the semester. Plot out your moves. I use something called an XP tracker. And so specifically for periods 1 through 3, I will have the students say, okay, we're going to go into the game and you're going to have to look at all your options, and you're going to have to debate, internally or with the people next to you, like, okay, what is the right decision, or what is the best move for our particular group? And so this is a student example that I have about the amount of detail that you can really put in. I know you can't read it, but the amount of thought that went into it for this particular student, even before they clicked a button to change something in the simulation. So they went through and they plotted out 7 different moves. They considered the position goal that would be impacted. They looked at the cost, and I'm very clear, I'll mark students down for this. I don't want you to talk about XP here. That's under the name of the action. The benefit, right? So thinking about, okay, if I do this, how might it benefit us, or how might it benefit the American people? But what could be the cost? The thing that sometimes students struggle with is, well, I don't see a downside to this action. And I always get them to think, well, maybe there's not an equal downside, but there is some downside that could happen, right? And so thinking and weighing whether it's worth it. And then what do you think the end result will be? And this becomes really important when we talk about kind of the major assessments that I use in the simulation. Okay, this is what you thought would happen. Did it happen? Why did that not happen, or why did that happen actually? That leads me into then playing, right? So then we actually spend time playing in class. That could be anywhere upwards of a block. We have 75-minute blocks here at Liggett, in class, and then they get time before our next class if they want to do things, communicate with people outside of class and make moves. Or it could be, if it's a longer period, usually periods 2 or 3 are a little bit more dense in the simulation. And maybe that takes 2 class periods or things like that. But they're gonna think about their moves before they make their moves, essentially. So again, giving time in class for students to make decisions, so that you're there for them to kind of bounce ideas off. I try never to give a straight answer. I might say, well, this could happen or this could happen, and what's the get them to think about that cost and benefit again. Then we reflect. And by that, I mean that we actually produce something. So after periods 1 and 2, I have them write a memo. And I call it a justification memo. And depending on whether they're in the executive branch, whether they're in Congress, ACLU, media, whatever it is, the memo looks more or less the same. They are writing to someone that they interacted with in the game, or I've had presidents write memos to members of their cabinet that may not actually be playable roles in the game. There needs to be a constituency that they're debating their action with. They have to identify, obviously, their role, the date that this happened, and the subject. And I would point out, going kind of back into the simulation here, how important, and let's go in and actually play, how important the messaging center becomes in all of this, for them to kind of figure out and track when things happen and why they did what they did. So using the actual date and time function for them to chronologically line up these events. And then a subject. What is this about? I often say this is probably related to the action that you performed, right? Or the messaging line that's in your messaging center. They have to talk about what issue is presented, so a 4 to 6 sentence explanation. And then they need to weigh the costs and benefits of this action. So they're acting as if the action hasn't happened yet. And that's where that key role of what they hope will happen. And then they can talk about, after the fact, right? Okay, what did happen? We use a standardized rubric for skill building in our department. And so, this notion of connections to government, approaches to learning, research, communication, this is something the students will see in their world history class, their U.S. history class, their electives. And then you can just kind of tailor it to the specific assignment. And so the students will have an understanding of what skills they're developing and the expectations. And so the justification memo is a way to check in after periods 1 and 2. If they're making logical choices or choices that they've thought through. I guess they don't always have to be logical, but hopefully that they've at least thought them through a little bit. And then after periods 3 and 4, it becomes a little bit more detailed. I always tell the students, hey, you wrote something internally to people playing the game. Well, government's responsible to the people. And so now you need to think, you need to face outward a little bit more, and you need to create a product. And so what I try to do is have some real world things that these different professions would possibly do when interacting with the people. So if we look at the media here, they could write their own news story. They could record a news segment. They could create their own news segment. They could serve as the social media entity or the social media manager and produce tweets or a Facebook page with news updates or Twitter template or so on. And I have examples linked that they can kind of go to there. They could interview a member of government or the ACLU. So they could get with somebody in the class and they could work together, right, to have an interview about what's going on in periods 3 and 4. The executive branch, they can write a press release. They can record a press conference, give an interview to a member of the media. The presidents can issue an executive order. They can give an Oval Office address, and in Congress, similar things. They can introduce bills that they don't get a chance to in the game that they think would help their cause. They could give a floor speech with multiple people in Congress. They could hold a committee hearing. They can do an interview with the media. So there's a lot of crossover opportunities. Campaign managers can create campaign materials to help their candidate get elected. And then the ACLU can write a press release. They can write a legal brief. They can post to social media, or again, they can participate in an interview. So they have to create some sort of product, and there's some brief guidelines there. I talk about, okay, what should you use, right? Connecting everything back to the game. They got to use screenshots from the simulation, XP trackers or justification memos from period 1, 2, and the supplementary resources. Now, they don't need to use all of those things, but they need to use some of them to help inform what they're writing for periods 3 and 4. And again, this rubric, same as they've seen before, but it's a more detailed project, so it contains a greater point value. But again, connections to government, approaches to learning, research, communication. So the same skills that we're focusing on building show up in each of the major assignments. And then repeat, right? For periods 1, 2, and 3, I do this exact process. All we're doing is changing the information. Period 4, as we move towards the end of the semester and we're preparing for our final, I don't make them necessarily do the annotated brief. I don't have supplementary resources. I don't have them do an XP tracker. They kind of know what to do at that point. So it's kind of taking the training wheels off a little bit in that final period and allowing them to prepare to justify their actions in the debriefing presentation. And that is something that I choose to do in class, partially because the way that it being a semester, the way that this class is particularly structured, the presentation makes the most sense for my class. And so just to kind of give you an example of things that the students can use from the simulation to build their presentation, I have students I tell them take screenshots in each period to kind of help justify their actions. And so this person released their position goals finally. It's kind of like a reveal in the debriefing presentation. So they took screenshots of what their position goals were, mapped out and talked about what they did from period 1 to period 2 to period 3, and then finally to period 4, and what they saw as their main goals. Just to move on to another example really quickly before I click on the project, the full project explanation. Someone who's a campaign manager tracked the approval rating of their candidate from period 1 to the end of the simulation. And talked about, well, 60% was a threshold that I needed, and hey, just at the end I got there. So talked about how their polling changed and why there might have been a dip somewhere in the middle of the simulation. If I remember correctly, there was a terrorist threat that people did not feel that government responded to well. And so they saw a decline. So just really quickly click on the debriefing presentation. I know Stefan mentioned this when he's talking about the IR in terms of kind of building your own materials that can make their way into the simulation and kind of vice versa. The debriefing presentation, the questions I ask students to focus on, those all come from Statecraft. They were created. I just kind of pulled them into my own Google Doc. I tell the students that there's 2 or 3 options in each section to pick one, and then build their presentation from there. And their goal is to answer that question, but also reveal why they made the choices that they did and how successful they thought they were in the simulation. And so, again, working with Statecraft's resources, you can build your own, and so kind of balancing kind of that, both the ability to adjust what you need for your specific class at your specific school, but also having really solid information that is likely to apply to what you're doing. It has been very helpful. Let's see here. So I'm going to pass it back to Stefan here to talk about the activity kind of leading out of this particular webinar.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. And appreciate your going into depth about that. To reiterate, Scott talked about period 0 stuff in the last workshop number 2. So that'll also be linked in the video and probably in the description below. With that being said here, let's just look at the activity. This is for you to do between now and November 8th, and we have our next one. If you can make it, whether you're here today or you're watching the recording and you want to join that one, this could be a great way to then brainstorm and then share and then get other ideas from other teachers. So essentially, which course we'll be using the simulation in? Is it a ELA course? Is it a international relations course, a model UN course, a US government course? And which sim is it that you're doing? So basic, right? Think of the specific concept of your course that you would like students to grasp most. Sometimes this is the hardest one, sometimes it's the easiest one, sometimes it's somewhere in between. But if you've taught for at least a year, you have an idea. If you haven't taught before, maybe the one that you think they will have the hardest time grasping. Potentially even ask a colleague years has taught a class before, where do you find that students are struggling most? If you already know a specific time of year, maybe that lines up well, right before spring break, right before winter break. Are there concepts at those points in time that match up? What questions, skills, or concepts might help in connecting those concepts to the real world? Is it public speaking? Is it having a understanding of the basic theories that then can be discussed in a country or with just the executive branch? What question, skills, or concepts might help in connecting those? And then to that second part, the real world, are there real world examples that can elevate that connection, like you were bringing up, Scott? Did you got something to add?
Oh no, I just realized that we are still on my presentation, so I was quickly catching up the bullet points as you were talking. So I apologize
Oh no, you're good.
for those of you watching later. I just caught up to what Stefan was mentioning there.
Oh, you're doing great. Thanks, Scott. Then the next one here, through which sense do your students respond to best when learning? And this is going to differ from class to class, from the first period to the second period, from one year to the next. If your students like to get up and walk around the room, if they are best just listening, or are they best seeing something? Would it be best to like have a food platter, or bring in food from like their country? Something that could be linked to the best way that they learn. So that could look a lot different. I know that one of my classes, we did a debate and we had to stand in the front of the classroom, and it was nerve-wracking for sure, but I remember it. And I remember like being confident with my team because we made decisions based upon our collective goals. That doesn't happen with every team, but it was helpful to be there with them. And I remember how much that affected me at that time. The next part here, use that information, craft your activity that connects the simulation to your class. So find something that might work for you. You can take from all the ideas that Scott and I have given you today. You can customize a little bit there. You can create something from scratch. But the hope is that you come to the November 8th meeting with something that we can kind of discuss and walk through, and looking for some constructive feedback too. So if you think it's perfect, maybe it might be nice to like be open to like, hey, what are your thoughts? Where do you think I can improve on these connections? So that's the activity. It would be awesome to have you. Bring it on that next workshop, November 8th, Wednesday. Next thing here is, if you haven't set up your simulation yet, set up your simulation. I'm going to show you the Reddit channel because I have all of the links to all of the assignments that we just talked about today there. Register for upcoming workshops. And the fourth thing here is register for the instructor competition. So we're having 2 instructor competitions, 1 IR and 1 US government this next spring. If you want to do both, you can. They'll be on different days. If you want to focus on one, it might be easier, but it's up to you. This is all on our website, where you sign up for those workshops, as well as past workshop recordings. And then to touch on the Reddit channel, it is Statecraft_high school. You'll see here there's an international relations simulation assignments and US government, and those looking through it have a link to all those options. A lot of these, I mean, if you see a star, that's the one that Scott created, and then you can make a copy from there. I recommend, and I would love to see Scott's name on there still, since he has gone through and created these. And same to you, if you create something, feel free to post it on Reddit and make sure that you have the credit to, for your creation as well. For the IR relation or international relations simulation, there's a bunch here. You can dig into those weekly memos for all 4 of those AP classes here. And then just a few more of the ideas that we went through today. So those are the resources for you, easily accessible. Go for it, Scott. What you got?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and if you create something like off mine, please let me know. I would love to you know, like I personally think all my activities could be better. So if you find that there's some way that you're using it that really works, I'd love to know. I'd love to use it. This idea kind of came, not that it doesn't exist everywhere in education, but I went to a conference once and there was like, yeah, something like 50, 75 educators. And at the end, somebody stood up and said, hey, I manage this Google Drive with over 200 social studies teachers, and we just share stuff. And if you want to get on, and I thought that was really cool. And I've taken a lot of things from that over the years, from very generous teachers across the country. So it'd be cool if we could kind of do something similar.
Yeah, and feel free to post right under that too, so it keeps it in that same thread. That's a great idea, Scott. Thank you for that. And with that, I think we're done. Yeah, so thank you everybody for coming today. Appreciate your time. We're ending right on time.
Yeah.
So I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. If you want to stick around and ask questions, I'm going to stop the recording. And yeah, thanks so much again. See you on November 8th.